As far back as he could remember, the old house that sat on the corner of 5th and Levey had always been vacant. His childhood house was only a block away off of Dufig. Many trips on foot, board, or bicycle passing by that old 3-story boarded-up house along the sidewalk had been his youth. Marcus Holler was now a man of middle life, and he had pulled up alongside 474 Levey Street in his Ford Escape. Marcus had returned home briefly to the town of New Chestmill 6 years past after his mother had passed away. Attending her funeral had been difficult, as Marcus hardly had any free time. After college, Marcus Holler had landed a big city paycheck along with a steep title at one of the largest law firms, Hudson and Kenner at law. The citizens of New Chestmill could have blinked and missed the return of their small-town big-shot hero, as Marcus had blessed his late mother, Joyce, with a solid 20 minutes at her funeral. Now, 8 years later, Marcus was prepared to give an old house from his childhood more time and attention. Solely on the account of a large sum of wealth, of course. The firm had received a property dispute which had been filed against this very house. When Marcus had caught the details, he couldn't believe his ears or luck. The Mildew Museum? He had remarked as a fellow colleague cocked his eyebrow. It's what we kids used to call it. I think Tony may have dubbed it that first, but I guess that doesn't matter much now, does it? He trailed off as a summer day flashed past his eyes, and for a brief second he was 7 years old again. Anyways, Mr. Holler, the property which sits upon 474 Levey Street has lapsed into default on a shared mortgage. The city board wishes to enact an escape clause on the lien. Wilson, I think this is right up your... Robert Jr. Kenner was speaking while removing a pair of reading glasses from his stern face when Marcus perked up with a tad bit too much excitement. Mr. Kenner, sir, if I may, well, you see, I'm from New Chestmill, and like I stated, Levey's only a block away from my old kicking grounds. Most of those folks on the city board, well, I went to school with them. It may be forward of me to say so, but I know I'm best suited for this case, sir. Marcus spoke with that fiery passion he was known for on the courtroom floor, while Robert Jr. Kenner tapped the file against the palm a few times. An afternoon, Mr. Holler. You catch my drift? I want it nice and neat. The property, as it is, worthless. However, once that old house is out of the way, the land itself is going to be priceless. So no screw-ups, Mr. Holler. His employer barked at him with a stern snap as if his tongue was a bullwhip. Good luck, Marcus. Wilson Redder spoke up from behind him. Wilson was next in line for making partner at Hudson and Kenner, and had a reputation around the office which everyone shared, to the effect that Wilson Redder would sell his own grandmother to the city's gutters if it meant a guaranteed win for him. Thanks, Whip. Cut the bullshit, Holler. You think what you just did there was cute? I've been with this firm for only a fraction of your stay, and soon I'll be handing you the files. Do not step on my toes again, Holler. Now piss off. Wilson had leaned in close to Marcus to whisper his grievance against him, and then straightened his navy blue tie and walked away with a smug look across his face. That had been Wednesday. Now Thursday afternoon, Marcus stood outside of 474 Levey, gripping his briefcase, ready to march into victory for his firm. A quick visit to the town hall had allowed him to boast over his fancy degree and left him feeling tall and important amongst those he had encountered. Okay, Marcus, nice and swift. Slam dunk case. He exhaled all stress that was lingering, while pushing the butterflies down further into the pit of his gut. He crossed the sidewalk and began pushing through the long, overgrown, and untrimmed grass on the property. Reaching the front porch, he pulled the bright red paper from the inside of his suit pocket, which read, "Property foreclosed, under city order," and peeled back the sticky side of the notice, to which Marcus rubbed it smoothly onto the front door of the house. Feeling pleased with himself, he then reached into his pant pocket to retrieve the house key when the door swung open all of a sudden. "Ah, shit!" Marcus exclaimed out of shock as he caught himself from backing all the way off the porch. A woman stood at the door's entrance, simply looking up at him with a blank stare. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You scared me there," Marcus added. The woman did not reply. She looked to be in her 30s, with long curly sandy brown locks. She sported bright baby blues with a natural look of raw beauty, burning lips of passion red, and once Marcus' heart had calmed down, he quickly realized that she was wearing only a soft pink silk slip. Her body was that of a centerfold model, the naughty type that his mother used to scold him about whenever finding such filth while cleaning his room. The slip barely contained her large and smooth breast as his heart began to pick up speed again. The name is Marcus Holler," he spoke, but personally could care less what his own words were. He found himself passionately attracted to this mysterious woman now. "Mr. Holler, of course. I have been expecting you." She spoke with a voice that was as warm and welcoming as a cup of coffee. She stepped aside, allowing him to pass by her. As he did, the strong aroma of orange cinnamon tickled his nose. "May I take your jacket and case, Mr. Holler?" she asked as her hands gestured over to a coat rack. At that moment, Marcus only had one rack on his mind. No thanks. So I take it that the city has reached out to you about the property then, miss?" he asked out of sheer curiosity, seeing how just a half hour earlier a Patty Toneshoer had confirmed that the property was in fact vacant. "The city? Oh yes, they should not be a bother, Mr. Holler. Mrs. Delta, it is, as to your question, Martha Delta," she replied matter-of-factly while leading him over to a sitting room. As he stepped into the room, Marcus caught a faint sound, like maybe banging from behind a wall. The house was beyond beautiful, just like the woman before him. It was extremely clear to Marcus that the Deltons were loaded with dough, as everything he spotted inside of the house looked to cost more than his yearly salary. "Forgive me, Mrs. Delta, but I was told this property was vacant, so I find myself a tad bit confused here. You see, Mrs. Delta, I'm Marcus Holler, and I represent the city of New Chestmill on behalf of Hudson and Keller at law. Your husband wouldn't happen to be around, would he? Maybe I should share this information with the pair of you," he spoke up, as that slight banging sound perhaps was Mr. Delta elsewhere in the house. "My husband? No, Mr. Holler, he is not around. It's just myself and you and the gentleman caller here. The house is all to ourselves," she replied gracefully. His next thought skipped the track as her tone and body language seemed to be leading to one outcome. How foolish. This was a simple land dispute, a walk in the park, nice and neat, a case that came with a bow already tied to the top of it. He blinked a couple of times in a row to clear his mind, exhaling the naughty thoughts from his other eager mind. "Well, Mrs. Delta, unfortunately, I'm here today to inform you and make it official that 474 Levey has been foreclosed upon by the city of New Chestmill. They have chosen to evoke an escape clause that was built into the refinanced mortgage that you, along with your husband, had agreed to when you both had placed another lien onto the property here. I'm sorry to be the bringer of bad news. Like I said, I believe this place to be empty upon pulling up this afternoon." He spoke while she simply just twirled her fingers around in her beautiful head of hair. After a few moments of unbroken silence, she finally stopped playing with her hair and sat forward, arching her back while her soft pink silk slip did its best to hold her girls from bursting free. Sporting full cleavage, she batted her baby blue softly. Anything you like, Mr. Haller. Her question was straight to the point. He finally cracked a big grin and slapped his right knee. I'm sorry, Mrs. Delta. There is no bribing to be had here. There is nothing I can do. The city has made their final choice. Now, I can understand that this may be a difficult time. Marcus was speaking when Martha Delta stood up without notice and fled from the room. Mrs. Delta? Is everything okay? He called out after her swift exit. Her heels made a clear clicking sound that drifted away further and further until it was nothing but a faint sound. Marcus found himself speechless. This afternoon was one for the belfry. Clearing his throat, he stood up and took a couple of steps towards the doorframe in which Miss Delta had exited from. Mr. Haller, may I help you? A new voice spoke up from behind him as Marcus jumped almost out of his shoes. Swinging around, he found himself face to face with an older black gentleman in a very nice three-piece suit. Sir? He added as he raised his right eyebrow in question. I'm sorry. I'm completely lost. The house is empty, but it's not. The lonely housewife is home, but not her husband. It's just all, well, none of this seems right. You must be Mr. Delta, I take it, sir? Marcus asked, as after he was done rubbing his forehead, he offered his hand and a handshake. The older man merely looked at Marcus' open hand, but made no effort to return a handshake. No, sir, Mr. Delta is not in at the moment, sir. May I help you instead? So who are you then? Me, sir? Yes, you. Who else? Marcus replied, becoming very short with this game. Call me Samuel, sir. I take it you're here about the business, Mr. Haller? Samuel spoke with a stern, flat tone. Samuel, are you representing the Deltas in this matter? In all matters, Mr. Haller. Shit, why didn't you say so sooner? Good, then I'm back on track. I just need to have a couple of... Marcus was speaking as Samuel raised his left arm, pointing to the open door. Yes, of course. All in good time, Mr. Haller. This way, please. Mrs. Delta will be waiting for your company. Hey, just between me and you, Sam. Sam's okay, right? How about me and you bang this out, cause Mrs. Desperate Housewife is laying it on way too thick, if you catch my drift. Not saying that she isn't a looker, but I don't need any embarrassing backlash in court for a mishandling or mistrial. The boss tends to frown upon such hiccups. Please, Mr. Haller, this way. Mrs. Delta isn't a very patient woman, Samuel simply remarked, as not hearing a word from Marcus. Then he, too, left the room, leaving Marcus behind. You gotta be kidding me. What is this kooky place? He was now speaking to himself as he headed towards the door with briefcase in hand. As soon as he entered the hallway, his eyes glossed over as he quickly blinked and began rubbing his eyes in a quick panic so that the lights would turn back on. However, the rub did not help, as Marcus found himself standing in a dark hallway with no sign of light to be found anywhere. Yo, Sam! We hit a light switch, please? He called out as his ears didn't pick up any sounds. Turning around, Marcus took a step back towards the doorway, as he had had enough with this nonsense when he slammed face first into solid wall. Ouch! Damn it! He cried out as he checked his nose to see if it was broken. Then he began feeling the wall in search of a door handle. After a few seconds, Marcus was horrified to come to the conclusion that there was in fact no door to be found anywhere inside of this dark box he found himself in. No longer playing around, he dropped his briefcase to the floor as he quickly pulled his cell phone from his pant pocket and hit the power button. The glow from the phone's screen was a welcoming sight for sure, as he felt a tad bit calmer already. Then, switching the flashlight mode on, the phone's camera light became a beacon of sight for him. Four walls, no doors, no windows, no outlets, no decor, nothing whatsoever. Marcus Holler found himself standing inside of a box, banging on the walls with his fist. Hello, anyone hear me? Mrs. Delta, Samuel, anyone? This isn't funny. Let me the fuck out. Marcus had never considered himself claustrophobic before, but an overwhelming sense of terror and doom was growing in the pit of his stomach. Then, if it couldn't get any worse, his phone went dark. Marcus found himself encased in darkness once more, with no real sense of time or space. That may have been minutes, could very well have been hours. His mind raced with horrible thoughts. He had nothing but time on his hands, so the slow, agonizing process of understanding that he was most likely buried alive, trapped with no way to escape. Please! Another useless plea for help. His spirit was crushed. Finally fed up with the losing battle of breaking free, Marcus slid down the wall and sat down. Hey, stupid! Wanna end up a museum piece? No? Then stay away from that creepy place. My brother told me it's called the Mildew Museum because they pull children into there and they never ever come out. Young Tony Huxman barked to the group of friends as they stood outside of 474 Levey and stared at the big creepy house. Your brother's full of it, Hawkman. It's just an empty house. My dad even told me so, young Marcus replied as Tony cracked a wicked smile. Oh yeah, daddy's boy? Well, go on then, Holler. Go up and knock if my brother's full of baloney, Tony remarked as the group of friends all began to oh together as if double dog daring Marcus to do so. This is stupid, guys. We all know it's just some old abandoned house. Let's go get a pickup game of baseball going, Marcus had said, hoping to drop the silly and pointless dare. Chicken shit, Tony proudly remarked, as their friends were now laughing and high-fiving him. Marcus snapped back to the present, back to his pitch-black box of imprisonment. That had been a deep memory that was thought to be long forgotten, but it was crazy how the brain could store such data and hold it for you until the right moment. What good that memory did for him now, however. Guess he wasn't chicken shit after all. One small victory, he supposed. A pity washed over him. A small beam of light trickled into his box. Even that small of amount of light seemed to be high noon for Marcus, as he jumped to his feet with sheer excitement. Oh my God, it's a crack! There's a crack in the wall! Thank you, Lord, Marcus celebrated as he placed his eye right up to the crack to peek through. He could see the sitting room that he had spent time in along with Miss Delta when he had first arrived at Levey House. Hello! He shouted from the top of his lungs, as he also began banging on the wall again. Then he heard a familiar sound, clicking, high heel clicking. Mrs. Delta's high heels. Martha! Martha Delta! Can you hear me? Help, for the love of God! His knuckles were shooting in pain from hitting the wall so hard. Mrs. Delta walked right past the crack and entered the sitting room. Her soft pink silk slip blew freely in the breeze. As from behind, Marcus could clearly see that Martha was sporting a thong and nothing else underneath that slip. However, the hound side of him was no longer awake to find an amusement in that fact. She vanished from sight for a few seconds and then returned with a gentleman caller in tow. Marcus could care less if he broke his hand. He gave that wall all he had while screaming at the top of his lungs. Please, fucking help me. There was no more panic left in him, as it was all full fight time. Kicking and banging the wall and cracking his voice until his throat was raw. Once the adrenaline washed away from his fight, he eyeballed the crack once more, hoping to find aid. What he saw, however, brought a new level of fear he didn't even know was possible. In the sitting room, alongside Mrs. Delta, sat one Marcus Holler. Himself. His heart skipped a beat. His brain fogged over. He was staring at himself. His self, who was clearly all into what Mrs. Delta was laying down thick. A big fat shit-eating grin sat upon his face. He knew that look all too well. It was his I'm getting lucky look. What the fuck is happening? What? He took a couple steps back and bumped into the other wall. The world no longer made sense. His existence was quickly crashing down on him. I'm here. Where is here? No clue. But here I am. So who is that out there? Where is there? Am I me? Is that me out there? He began asking himself over and over in his mind, which felt overloaded. I'm sorry, Mrs. Delta. There is no bribing to be done here. There's nothing I can do. The city has made their final choice. Now I can understand that this may be a difficult time. Marcus clearly heard himself speaking to Mrs. Delta, as her quick exit was very easily heard thanks to her high heels. Mrs. Delta, is everything okay? The other Marcus called after her as her high heels grew louder and louder for Marcus this time around. Without warning, the box came to life with a warm glow of light. Standing before him, Martha Delta looked down at him with a devilish grin upon her cherry red lips of hers. Mr. Haller, I believe you're ready for me, she simply spoke while licking her lips. What? How? What is... Marcus could barely form a sentence as he just stared up at her ungodly beauty. You human beings are all too easy, which is good for me. The male only requires skin and a large set of these, she spoke as she placed her hands underneath her cups of her breast and physically removed her breast off of her chest. The boobs hit the floor near his feet. Marcus cried out in horror as tears began to roll down his face. A pretty face with luscious hair to boot, she went on, as she was now removing the hair from the top of her head, along with the flesh from her face, both landing near her boobs. Marcus did not wish to see what stood before him, as his whole body was now shaking with raw terror. He leaned over and puked all over his lap. A deep, cold sweat washed over him. Sex and lingerie is all it takes to entice you men. Such a pity. But I don't just simply crave you humans. No. Just like you humans love your scrambled eggs, I too love my scrambled brains. A sane brain just tastes off, but an insane brain, well, that just gets my mouth watering. She moaned out with pure joy and excitement as Marcus looked up at what now stood before him. There was no more left for Marcus to cry out. The horror that stood before him was so grand that what had been left of his brain was now completely lost. The woman, called Martha Delta, bent over Marcus Haller and softly whispered into his ear, I also like you to remain with it until the very end. So I start at the feet and work my way up. Hope that's a turn-on for you, big boy. Her lips curled up, exposing a vast jaw of shark-like teeth as a slimy, forked tongue flickered out and licked her devilish lips again. The box room went dark once more as the soft sound of flesh being torn from bone filled the space, along with the muffled cries of extreme pain. Outside of the room, Marcus Haller was in the middle of having a conversation with Samuel. Shit, why didn't you say so sooner? Good, then I'm back on track. I just need to have a couple of... Marcus was speaking as Samuel raised his left arm, pointing to the open door. Yes, of course, all in good time, Mr. Haller. This way, please. Mrs. Delta will be awaiting your company. The end.